Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'm going to be covering weather for July 1st of 2023. Currently there is an enhanced risk set up for parts of southern Illinois and parts of western Indiana into parts of western Kentucky and eastern Missouri. That is mostly going to be isolated to that region in particular, as well as a pretty large light risk around that extends the majority of southern Illinois and Indiana into parts of eastern Missouri and Arkansas, the northern Dixie states, and the majority of Kentucky and Tennessee, as well as into parts of western North Carolina and parts of western Virginia, as well as a pretty large marginal threat around that spans a majority of the eastern United States. That does extend all the way up into Canada, into parts of eastern Kansas as well. This particular region of the marginal threat is likely going to be more isolated from everywhere else and not really going to be all that much associated with this down here, and I'll show you why that is. And then we do have another slight risk set up for western Texas into parts of New Mexico, but mostly in western Texas with a marginal threat that does extend into northern Mexico. I probably won't cover this or that in today's forecast, likely just going to cover this in today's forecast. However, we do have another marginal threat for eastern Montana and parts of northwestern North Dakota as well. Our threats for all this include the possibility of a few tornadoes for southern Illinois and Indiana with that 5%, as well as a 2% around that for northern Kentucky and parts of Ohio, the majority of southern Indiana and Illinois into parts of eastern Missouri, as well as a 2% for that slight risk in western Texas, and not really all that much of a tornado threat for eastern Montana. However, as for our wind threats, which is possibly going to be our main threat aside from our tornado threat for today, is a 30% wind threat with the hatched significant threat for that initial cell system that is expected to develop in southern Illinois and Indiana. However, this hatched significant threat could possibly contribute and withstand the rest of today, continuing along with severe weather as it rapidly organizes and continues eastward across Kentucky and Tennessee and the northern Dixie states with extremely strong and destructive winds with expected derecho-like storm as it moves eastward across Kentucky and Tennessee. However, we do have a 5% wind threat for eastern Montana and northeastern North Dakota, as well as a 5% wind threat for that slight risk and a 5% for that marginal threat back towards western Texas. As for our hail threats, which isn't going to be all that much of a threat for today, we do have a 5% around that with a 15% around the enhanced risk area with a 5% around the majority of the rest of the threat with a small 5% for northern New York, and I'll show you why that is, as well as a 15% for that slight risk area with a 5% around that with that marginal threat across western Texas. I do think that this hail threat and that 2% tornado threat is going to be a little bit exaggerated and going to be much more of a localized event, and I'll show you why that is on the pivotal weather models. Taking a look at our pivotal weather models, we're going to be taking a look at our triggering factors for severe weather development today. We do have a pretty strong shortwave trough that is expected to move through the area of that enhanced risk area and trigger severe weather development there, with mid-level flow that is expected to be possibly in the low 40s to possibly the mid 40s. This is likely going to be associated with a low pressure system that's situated somewhere over Nebraska and North Dakota. However, this extremely strong shortwave trough, not extremely, it's fairly strong, but it is definitely going to allow for the possibility of some fairly strong wind shear and also elongated photographs to allow for the possibility of maybe some large hail in some isolated regions, but mostly going to be medium hail as well as some small hail, as well as the possibility of some directional shear, which will allow for the possibility of our tornado threat for today. And the reason I don't think that we should have all that much of a tornado threat back towards western Texas is because that area is catching the back end of the shortwave trough to trigger severe weather development. So I think Windshear is expected to be pretty weak. I don't think it's going to be sufficient enough to allow for the possibility of tornadoes back towards the western Texas slight risk area. However, it maybe allow for the possibility of some small to medium-sized hail back towards that region. But then let's take a look at the marginal threat that's back towards eastern Montana in North Dakota. We do have a fairly weaker and jet stream that is expected to strengthen over time moving out of Canada and the Pacific Ocean. This is expected to allow for the possibility of maybe some damaging winds and maybe some small hail, but it definitely looks like the main threat is going to be the possibility of small hail and some damaging winds, because wind shear is not likely going to be all that strong for a tornado threat back towards this region. Taking a look at our dew points, you can already see off the bat we have some extremely strong dew points. This is almost tropical levels of dew points that reach the mid to upper 70s, like the 78s and the 77s, maybe even the 79s in some regions near the Mississippi River. Depending on our lapse rates, this reminds me back in Texas whenever we had lapse rates that were fairly strong, as well as with dew points that looked exactly like this. We had some extremely strong lapse rates, which led to Cape values that reached the widespread 5,000s and even the low 6,000s in some regions, and some widespread regions as well. So depending on our lapse rates, we could definitely see maybe a repeat of that here, but this area is much more tree covered, so lapse rates may not be as strong and they may not get up to the same levels back in Texas, but it is definitely possible depending on our lapse rates as well. And we'll take a look at our lapse rates after dew points, but these extremely strong dew points, like almost tropical levels of dew points, is overall just going to allow for extremely strong instability by default, depending on our lapse rates or not. They're definitely going to allow for the possibility of some 3,000 Cape. You can see as storms do develop in extremely strong moisture in the mid to upper 70s. They are expected to rapidly organize across much of western Tennessee and continue eastward. And you can see that moisture is expected to persist across that line in extremely strong levels still in the mid to upper 70s, allowing for the possibility of some 3,000s, possibly the upper 3,000s ahead of this line as well, which is going to support the possibility of some extremely strong and destructive winds. Again, that's mostly going to be our main threat, because I don't think the shortwave trough is going to move through this area and allow for the possibility of some stronger wind shear for any tornado potential with this line, as well as not really all that much of a hail threat. Again, our threat's mostly going to be the possibility of some strong damaging winds. Taking a look at our lapse rates, you can see that we have some extremely strong lapse rates off the bat. You can see that we do have the possibility of more moderate lapse rates, mostly in the 6s to 7s and possibly the mid to upper 7s towards the northern Dixie Alley area. They are expected to be mostly away from where initial storm development is expected to begin. However, extremely strong lapse rates across much of the region is definitely going to allow for the possibility of maybe some 4,000 Cape values. Definitely allow for the possibility of some extremely strong instability today. And you can see as the storms do rapidly organize and continue eastward, you can see that we do have some more moderate and weaker lapse rates, but they are definitely in the 6s to possibly the upper 6s and maybe even the low 7s in some regions, which is definitely going to allow for the persistent possibility of 3,000s and possibly even the low 4,000s in Cape values with the moisture and lapse rates that we are seeing currently. Taking a look at our instability, you can see that we have some extremely strong instability in the regions where storms are expected to develop first, in the Memphis and southern Illinois region. We have some extremely strong instability. Our Cape values are expected to reach the possibility of some 4,000s to possibly the upper 4,000s, maybe even the low 5,000s in some isolated regions across of western Tennessee. However, it does look like it is going to be a little bit unlikely, but definitely still possible. They are definitely going to allow for the possibility of some upper 4,000 Cape values. Extremely strong instability like this with whatever wind shear we have is definitely going to allow for the possibility of tornadoes in that 5% tornado threat region, as well as persist along that line, ahead of that line, with Cape values that do reach the upper 3,000s and possibly even the low 4,000s across a widespread region. This is definitely going to allow for the possibility of some extremely strong winds ahead of this line. We are definitely going to allow for the possibility of a derecho for today with this line. Again, this is definitely going to be the possibility of some extremely strong winds, more so than hail or any tornadoes as this line continues eastward. Now let's take a look at our wind shear and how it might affect our tornado potential. You can see where that shortwave trough is moving through the region across Illinois and Missouri. You can see that we do have some fairly strong wind shear that is going to allow for the possibility of that 2% to 5% tornado threat across southern Illinois, as well as maybe persist a little bit with a second line that develops behind that, and maybe allowing the possibility of a 2% tornado threat behind that. But you can see after storms rapidly develop and continue eastward, we don't have any really strong wind shear or any notable wind shear. You can't really see all that much strong wind shear at all. So I don't think hail is going to be all that much of a possibility with this line as it continues eastward. However, with extremely strong instability, we could definitely allow for the possibility of some very strong and destructive winds ahead of this line. But again, definitely not the possibility of embedded tornadoes or strong hail. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. And if you live in this region, please stay weather alert for the time being, as strong damaging winds could definitely do damage to either your house or your car, and you definitely do not want to be caught outside in something like this. And make sure to subscribe for more weather content.